The boring daily life of an Egyptian brickmaker. The sun hasn't yet risen over the Nile, but Khenti is already awake. Not because he wants to be, but because the rhythm of brick making begins before dawn, when the air is still cool, when the clay can be worked without cracking in the heat. This is how it begins. Every day. For as long as Khenti can remember. He is a brickmaker in the 19th year of Pharaoh Ramesses II's reign. The year is approximately 1260 BCE, though of course Khenti wouldn't think of it that way. Time, for him, is measured differently. The flooding of the Nile. The harvest. The endless cycle of the seasons. And bricks. Always bricks. Khenti lives in a small mud brick house on the outskirts of Ramesses, the great city that Pharaoh is building in the delta. His house is simple, 2 rooms, a flat roof where he sometimes sleeps in the hot months, a small courtyard. It's made of the same bricks he produces every day. Everything in Egypt, it seems, is made of brick. The great temples are stone, yes. The pyramids are stone. But the homes, the granaries, the walls, the workshops, the administrative buildings, all brick. Millions upon millions of sun-dried mud bricks, each one made by someone like Khenti. Each one shaped by human hands. He rises from his sleeping mat. His wife, Nefret, is already at the grinding stone, preparing the morning meal. She doesn't look up. They've been married for 12 years, and they've learned to move around each other in the small space without much need for words. Breakfast is simple. Bread made from emmer wheat, slightly gritty from the stone-ground flour. A few dates. Water from the jar they filled yesterday at the canal. Egyptian workers ate a repetitive diet: bread, beer, onions, occasionally fish or fowl if they were lucky. Meat was rare, a luxury reserved for festivals or offerings to the gods. Khenti eats quickly. The workyard where the bricks are made is perhaps a 10-minute walk from his house, and he needs to arrive early. Not because he's particularly ambitious, but because the overseers notice who arrives late. And the overseers carry sticks. He steps outside into the pre-dawn darkness. The air is still, heavy with moisture from the Nile. In a few hours, it will be blazing hot. But now, it's almost pleasant. Other workers are moving through the streets, shadows in the dimness. All heading the same direction. To the brick yards. To the quarries. To the building sites. Ramesses is a city under construction, and that construction requires thousands of workers, moving like ants toward their assigned tasks. Khenti is 32 years old, though he looks older. The sun has weathered his skin to dark leather. His hands are permanently stained with mud and straw. His back aches constantly from the bending, the lifting, the endless repetitive motions of brick making. But he's alive. He's fed. His children, 2 boys and a girl, are healthy. In Egypt, in this time, that's more than many can say. He reaches the brick yard just as the first hint of light appears on the eastern horizon. The yard is a large open area near the Nile, where clay can be easily accessed and water is plentiful. This is essential. Brick making requires enormous amounts of both. The area is already busy. Perhaps 40 or 50 workers are gathering, some preparing the clay pits, others bundling straw, others laying out the wooden brick molds in long rows. The operation is organized, efficient, practiced. They've been doing this for years. 4 decades. 4 generations. An overseer stands on a slight rise, watching the workers arrive. His name is Panub, and he's not a cruel man by the standards of the time, but he's not kind either. He's simply doing his job, which is to ensure that the daily quota of bricks is met. Every day. Without exception. The quota system in ancient Egypt was precise and unforgiving. Workers were assigned specific production targets. For brick makers, this was typically between 1,500 and 2,000 bricks per day, per team. Miss your quota, and there were consequences. Reduced rations. Beatings. In extreme cases, forced labor in worse conditions. Khenti belongs to a team of 5 men. They've worked together for years. Khenti, his cousin Ammonius, and 3 others whose names have become as familiar as his own family. Nacht, who jokes constantly to make the work bearable. Senub, who's quiet but steady. And old Hori, who's been making bricks since before Khenti was born and somehow still shows up every day, his hands gnarled but still capable. Morning, Nacht says as Khenti joins them. Ready for another glorious day of making mud rectangles? Khenti manages a tired smile. I was born ready to make mud rectangles. It's my life's calling. This is the humor of men doing hard, monotonous work. Self-deprecating. Resigned. Finding small moments of levity because without them, the work would be unbearable. They move to their assigned area. The first task is preparing the clay. The clay comes from the banks of the Nile, dug out and transported to the brick yard. But it can't be used as is. It must be processed, mixed, prepared. Khenti and Ammonius begin working the clay pit. They've already added water yesterday evening, letting the clay soak overnight. Now they must knead it, mixing in chopped straw to bind it, to give it structure, to prevent cracking as it dries. The straw is essential. Ancient Egyptian bricks were a composite material. Now mud mixed with chopped straw or chaff. The organic material acted as a binding agent, creating a matrix that held together as the brick dried. Without it, the bricks would be too brittle, cracking and crumbling. The ratio mattered. Too little straw, and the bricks cracked. Too much, and they were weak, unable to bear weight. The brick makers learned the correct proportions through experience, through the knowledge passed down from master to apprentice, from father to son. Khenti steps into the clay pit, his feet sinking into the cool mud. This is the first part of the work, trampling. They walk through the clay, kneading it with their feet, mixing in the straw, ensuring everything is evenly distributed. Back and forth. Round and round. For perhaps an hour, sometimes more, until the consistency is right. It's hard work, but not the hardest part of the day. Your legs tire, your feet grow sore, but at least you're moving. At least there's some variety in the motion. The sun is rising now, turning the sky from gray to pink to bright blue. The temperature is already climbing. By midday, it will be brutally hot, the kind of heat that shimmers off the ground, that makes the air itself seem to burn. But the bricks must be made. The quota must be met. The Pharaoh's city must be built. Once the clay is properly mixed, the real work begins. The molding. Senub brings over the wooden molds. These are simple rectangular frames, open on top and bottom, usually made from acacia or tamarisk wood. Each mold produces 1 brick at a time. The dimensions are standardized, roughly 30 centimeters long, 15 centimeters wide, and 10 centimeters tall. Not exactly the same as modern bricks, but close enough that the basic principle would be recognizable to any builder today. The standardization of brick sizes was one of ancient Egypt's quiet innovations. It allowed for efficient construction, for planning, for buildings where components were interchangeable. Thousands of workers making millions of bricks, all roughly the same size, all fitting together into walls and structures that would last for millennia. Khenti takes a mold and places it on the prepared ground. The ground has been smoothed and dusted with sand or ash to prevent the bricks from sticking. Then he reaches into the prepared clay, scoops up a large handful, more than seems necessary, and slaps it into the mold. This is technique. You need more clay than the mold holds because it must be packed down, compressed, ensuring no air pockets that could weaken the brick. Khenti presses the clay firmly with his hands, working it into the corners, smoothing the top surface. Then, in one practiced motion, he lifts the mold away. The brick remains, sitting on the ground, holding its shape. One brick. Complete. He places the mold a hand's width away and begins again. Scoop. Slap. Press. Smooth. Lift. Next brick. Again. And again. And again. This is the rhythm of brick making. The endless repetition. Scoop. Slap. Press. Smooth. Lift. Move the mold. Repeat. Khenti will do this motion approximately 300 to 400 times today. His team of 5 will produce their quota of bricks, roughly 2,000 in total. Each man making 400 bricks. Each brick requiring the same motions, the same care, the same attention. The work is mind-numbing. Your body moves automatically after the first hour. Your hands know what to do without thought. Your mind drifts, thinking about nothing, about everything, about the ache in your back and the sweat dripping into your eyes and how many more hours until the midday break. This is the boring daily life of an Egyptian brick maker. Not the glory of pyramids or temples. Not the drama of pharaohs and wars. Just mud and straw and wooden molds. The same motions. The same product. Day after day after day. The sun climbs higher. The heat intensifies. Khenti's hands are caked with mud. His back is starting to hurt in that familiar way that means it will hurt worse by evening. But the row of bricks is growing. One after another, they sit drying in the sun. Raw and soft now, but in a few days they'll be hard enough to stack, to transport, to build with. Somewhere, perhaps a mile away, other workers are constructing the actual buildings. Laying these same bricks in walls, in temples, in granaries. Creating the structures that define Egypt. But Khenti never sees those buildings completed. His job is just to make the bricks. The building is someone else's responsibility. He thinks about this sometimes. About how his work connects to the larger whole. Each brick he makes might become part of a temple wall, might form part of a storage building, might help create a house for some official he'll never meet. Or it might crack during drying and be thrown away, remade, forgotten. Either way, tomorrow he'll make more bricks. And the day after that. And the day after that. This is his life. This is his purpose. This is the boring, essential, endless work of making mud into rectangles. And the day has only just begun. The sun is fully risen now, blazing down on the brickyard with relentless intensity. Khenti has been working for perhaps 2 hours, and already he's produced maybe 80 bricks. They sit in neat rows behind him, drying in the sun, slowly transforming from soft mud to something hard and useful. His hands move automatically now. Scoop. Slap. Press. Smooth. Lift. The motion is so familiar that he doesn't need to think about it anymore. His mind can wander while his body continues the work. He thinks about his son, Ramesses, who is 10 years old. Old enough to begin learning a trade. Nefert wants the boy to become a scribe, to learn the sacred hieroglyphs, to work with papyrus and ink instead of mud and straw. Scribes don't break their backs in the sun. Scribes sit in the shade and tell other people what to do. But becoming a scribe requires education. Requires connections. Requires money that Khenti doesn't have. The scribal schools take on students from families with means, with influence. Not the sons of brick makers. More likely, Ramesses will follow his father's path. Will learn to mix clay and shape bricks. Will spend his life doing exactly what Khenti is doing now. The thought makes Khenti sad, though he'd never say this aloud. In ancient Egypt, professions typically passed from father to son. There was some mobility. A talented individual might rise through skill or luck, but generally, you inherited your father's trade. If your father was a brick maker, you became a brick maker. If your father was a carpenter, you learned woodworking. The social structure was relatively rigid, with each family occupying a specific niche in the economic system. Old Hori calls out from a few paces away. Water bearer coming. Khenti looks up. A young boy, perhaps 12, is moving through the workyard carrying a large clay jar on his shoulder. Water. Finally. The boy makes his rounds, stopping at each team, letting the workers drink from the communal jar. This is provided by the administration. Water for the workers is considered essential, especially in the brutal heat. Without it, people would simply collapse, and production would stop. When the boy reaches Khenti's team, they each take turns drinking. The water is warm, slightly muddy, tasting of the clay jar, but it's wet and that's all that matters. Khenti drinks deeply, feeling the water cut through the dust in his throat. How many so far? Nat asks, nodding toward the rows of drying bricks. Maybe 80, Khenti replies. We're behind. We'll need to pick up the pace after the midday break. This is the constant calculation. The mathematics of survival. They need 2,000 bricks by day's end. 5 men working together. That's 400 bricks each. They work from dawn until dusk, roughly 12 hours in the summer months, a bit less in winter. Which means they need to average about 35 bricks per hour. Every hour. If they fall behind in the morning, they must work faster in the afternoon. If they fail to meet the quota, well, Pan the overseer will want to know why. And his explanations involve his stick more often than his words. The brick makers of ancient Egypt worked under a quota system that was remarkably sophisticated for its time. Administrators tracked production carefully, keeping records written on ostraca, pottery shards used as writing surfaces. These records sometimes survive today, showing exactly how many bricks each team produced, noting absences, recording shortfalls. The pressure was constant. Meet the quota or face consequences. And the quotas were set high enough that meeting them required consistent, sustained effort throughout the day. There was no coasting. No taking it easy. Just the relentless push to produce, produce, produce. Khenti returns to his work. Scoop. Slap. Press. Smooth. Lift. Another brick. Another step toward the quota. The hours pass slowly. The heat becomes oppressive. Khenti's back is screaming now, a constant ache that radiates from his lower spine up through his shoulders. Every time he bends to scoop the clay, pain shoots through him. But he doesn't stop. Can't stop. The work must continue. Around him, the brickyard hums with activity. Dozens of workers doing the same thing he's doing. The sound of mud being slapped into molds. The occasional grunt of effort. The shuffle of feet on dusty ground. The overseer's voice calling out instructions or corrections. It's a kind of music, Khenti thinks. The rhythm of labor. Not beautiful, exactly, but familiar. Comforting in its predictability. Near the midday mark, something breaks the routine. A commotion near the entrance to the yard. Khenti glances up, grateful for any excuse to pause his work, even briefly. A group of men is arriving. Not workers. Officials. You can tell by their clean white linen kilts, by the way they walk with authority, by the scribes accompanying them with writing materials. Panab hurries over to greet them, bowing respectfully. There's a brief conversation, too distant for Khenti to hear. Then Panab begins leading the officials through the workyard, pointing at various things, explaining the operation. Inspection, Senab mutters. Just what we need. Inspections were common in ancient Egyptian work sites. The bureaucracy was extensive, with multiple layers of administration overseeing production. Officials would visit workyards to verify that quotas were being met, that materials weren't being stolen, that workers were actually working and not shirking their duties. For the workers, inspections meant extra scrutiny, extra pressure. You needed to look busy, productive, efficient. Any sign of laziness or inefficiency could result in discipline. Khenti picks up his pace slightly, making sure his movements are crisp and purposeful. Scoop. Slap. Press. Smooth. Lift. Look productive. Look like a man who takes pride in his work. The officials pass by his team, the scribe noting something on a piece of papyrus. Khenti doesn't look up. Doesn't make eye contact. Just keeps working. After a few minutes, the inspection party moves on to another section of the yard. The tension eases slightly. Probably checking on materials, Ammonius says. Making sure we're not using too much straw or wasting clay. Everything in Egypt is counted, old Hori observes. Every brick. Every handful of straw. Every drop of water. The administration knows exactly what goes in and what comes out. He's right. The Egyptian bureaucracy was extraordinarily detailed. Scribes kept records of everything: grain stores, livestock, production outputs, worker attendance. This allowed for efficient resource allocation, but it also meant that waste or theft was quickly detected. For brick makers, this meant accountability. The clay you used was measured. The straw was rationed. The number of bricks you produced was counted. There was no hiding, no fudging the numbers. You produced your quota or you faced consequences. The sun reaches its zenith. The heat is almost unbearable now. The air shimmers. The ground is hot enough to burn bare feet, though Khenti's feet are so calloused after years of this work that he barely notices. Finally, the horn sounds. Midday break. The workers immediately stop and seek shade. There's not much, a few palm trees at the edge of the yard, an awning erected over the water station. Men cluster in these sparse patches of shadow, grateful for any relief from the direct sun. Food is distributed. More bread. Some onions. A thick, slightly sour beer that's as much nutrition as refreshment. Beer was a staple in ancient Egypt, consumed by everyone from pharaohs to slaves. It was usually thick and nutritious, made from partially baked bread soaked in water and allowed to ferment. Not at all like modern beer, but a valuable source of calories and hydration. Khenti eats without tasting. His mind is on the numbers. He's made maybe 190 bricks so far. The team as a whole is at perhaps 950. They're behind. Not terribly behind, but enough that the afternoon will require faster work, fewer breaks, sustained effort. We'll make it, Nat says, reading his expression. We always make it. Barely, Khenti replies. Barely is enough. Around them, other workers are having similar conversations. Calculating. Worrying. The quota hangs over everything like a weight, pressing down, demanding more. Some teams are ahead of schedule. Some are behind. By evening, some will have made their numbers and some won't. Those who don't will face Panab's displeasure. And tomorrow, they'll start again, the slate wiped clean, the quota reset. This is the treadmill of Egyptian labor. You never get ahead. You just try not to fall behind. The break lasts perhaps 30 minutes. Not long enough to truly rest, but enough to eat, to drink, to let the worst of the midday heat pass. Then the horn sounds again, and the workers return to their stations. Khenti looks at the afternoon stretching ahead of him. Hours more of bending, scooping, pressing. Hours more of the same motions repeated endlessly. Hours more until he can finally stop, go home, collapse on his sleeping mat. But first, more bricks. Always more bricks. He picks up his mold, places it on the ground, and reaches for the clay. His back protests. His hands are raw. His feet ache. But he continues. Because this is what he does. This is who he is. An Egyptian brick maker. One of thousands. Making the materials that build a civilization, one mud rectangle at a time. The work continues. The sun continues its arc across the sky. And Khenti continues making bricks. Scoop. Slap. Press. Smooth. Lift. Again. And again. And again. The boring daily life of an Egyptian brick maker. Repetitive. Exhausting. Essential. And still only halfway through the day. The afternoon sun beats down mercilessly. Khenti has long since stopped thinking about anything except the next brick. The next scoop of clay. The next press into the mold. His world has narrowed to this small repetitive circle of motion. Around him, the workyard continues its steady hum. The sounds blur together, the slap of wet clay, the scrape of molds on sand, the occasional voice calling out for more water or more straw. It's almost hypnotic. The rhythm of mass production, ancient style. Khenti's hands are beginning to crack. The constant exposure to wet clay, then drying in the sun, then wet clay again, it takes a toll on the skin. By evening, his hands will be painful, the cracks deep enough to bleed. Nefert will rub them with oil tonight, as she does every night, trying to keep the damage manageable. But tomorrow, he'll be back in the clay again. And the damage will continue. This is simply the cost of the work. The physical toll of brick making was significant. Workers developed chronic back problems from the constant bending. Their hands bore permanent scars and calluses. Many suffered from sun damage, burned skin that never quite healed, eyes damaged by years of working in brilliant reflective light off sand and water. The life expectancy of manual laborers in ancient Egypt was significantly lower than that of scribes or priests, partly due to these accumulated injuries. 250, Nacht announces, counting the bricks in his row. You? Kenny glances back at his work. Maybe 240. Close. They're getting there. Slowly. The afternoon is proving more productive than the morning, though the cost is fatigue. Every brick now requires more effort than the last. The clay feels heavier. The mold feels heavier. Even the simple act of lifting and moving feels like pushing through thick water. Senab is working silently, his face set in concentration. He's the steadiest of them all, never fast but never slowing, maintaining exactly the same pace hour after hour. It's almost mechanical, the way he works. Khenti envies that consistency. His own pace varies, faster when he's fresh, slower as exhaustion sets in. Old Hori is struggling. Khenti can see it in the way the older man moves, in the frequent pauses to stretch his back. Hori must be past 50 now, ancient by laborer standards. Most men doing this work don't make it to that age. But Hori keeps showing up, keeps producing his bricks, because what choice does he have? There was no retirement system in ancient Egypt, at least not for workers like them. You worked until you physically couldn't anymore. Then you depended on family to support you, or you starved. The concept of a pension, of earned rest after years of labor, simply didn't exist for common workers. Some temples and state institutions did provide rations for elderly workers who could no longer work, but this was inconsistent and often inadequate. Many elderly people ended up doing lighter tasks, grinding grain, spinning flax, watching children, anything that contributed while not requiring the strength of youth. Khenti wonders what will happen when he's Hori's age. Will his sons support him? Will he have saved enough, though saved what? He's paid in rations, not coins. Food and beer and occasionally cloth. There's nothing to save except perhaps a little extra grain if the harvest is good. He pushes the thought away. That's decades in the future. Right now, there are bricks to make. The sun begins its slow descent toward the western horizon. The worst of the heat is passing. The air becomes slightly more bearable, though the accumulated heat of the day still radiates from the ground, from the brick molds, from everything. This is when mistakes happen. When fatigue makes your movements sloppy, when you press the clay unevenly or pull the mold away too quickly and the brick slumps, ruined. Each ruined brick is one more that needs to be remade, putting you further behind on the quota. Khenti tries to stay focused, to maintain precision even as his body screams for rest. Scoop carefully. Press firmly. Smooth evenly. Lift with control. The rows of finished bricks behind him have grown substantially. 280 now. 300. 320. The numbers climb slowly, painfully, but they climb. A commotion breaks out across the yard. Khenti looks up to see one of the workers, a younger man from another team, on the ground, clutching his leg. Others have gathered around him. "Snake bite," someone calls out. The overseers converge quickly. Panab is shouting for someone to fetch the physician, though physician is a generous term for the man who serves the work yard. He's more of a practical healer, someone who knows how to splint broken bones and treat cuts, but has no formal training. Snakes were a constant danger in ancient Egypt, particularly in areas near the Nile where the brickyards were located. Cobras, vipers, and other venomous species lived in the reeds and along the riverbanks. Workers moving through clay pits or brush were frequently bitten. The mortality rate from snake bites was high, as effective antivenom didn't exist. The workers carry the bitten man away from the work area. His leg is already swelling. His face is pale with shock and fear. Everyone knows what a snake bite means. Sometimes you survive. More often, you don't. But there's no time to dwell on it. Panab is already shouting for everyone to return to work. The quota doesn't change because someone got bitten. The day's production must still be met. Khenti returns to his bricks, but the incident has shaken him. It's a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong. How fragile life is. You come to work healthy and leave injured or dead. It happens. Not often, but often enough that everyone knows someone who died at a work site. Falls. Snake bites. Heat stroke. Crushing injuries when mud walls collapsed. The work itself might be boring, but it wasn't safe. "Keep moving," Ammonius says quietly. "Don't think about it." Good advice. Thinking about danger doesn't make you safer. It just makes you slower. And being slow puts your quota at risk, which brings its own dangers. The afternoon wears on. 350 bricks. 380. 400. Khenti finally reaches his personal quota just as the sun touches the horizon. 400 bricks. His share. He straightens up slowly, his back cracking audibly. The relief of stopping is almost overwhelming. He wants to collapse right there on the ground, to simply lie down and never move again. But the day isn't quite over. The bricks must be inspected. Panab and one of his assistant overseers walk through the yard, examining the day's production. They're checking for quality, bricks that are too thin or too thick, that have visible cracks, that aren't properly squared. Defective bricks are marked with a stick, and the team responsible must remake them tomorrow before starting on the new quota. This quality control was surprisingly rigorous. Egyptian construction standards required uniformity. Bricks needed to be consistent in size and shape to stack properly, to create stable walls. Teams that consistently produced substandard bricks faced consequences, reduced rations, reassignment to worse work details, or in extreme cases, corporal punishment. Panab reaches Khenti's section. He walks along the rows of bricks, occasionally nudging one with his foot, checking corners and edges. His face is expressionless, giving nothing away. Finally, he moves on without marking any. Khenti allows himself to breathe. No defects. No remakes. They're done. The team's total is counted. Just over 2,000 bricks. They've met the quota. Barely, but enough. Acceptable, Panab announces, making a notation on his papyrus. Same quota tomorrow. Of course. It's always the same quota tomorrow. The workers begin the process of cleaning up. The clay pits are covered with damp cloth to keep the clay from drying out overnight. The molds are rinsed and stacked. Tools are gathered and stored in the shed. The work yard slowly empties as teams finish and are dismissed. The snakebite victim is carried away toward the workers' village, his fate uncertain. The rows upon rows of fresh bricks sit drying, representing the collective effort of 50 men working 12 hours. Tomorrow, new workers will come and transport these bricks away. They'll be stacked, stored, eventually used in construction. And Khenti's team will make 2,000 more. And the day after that, 2,000 more. The cycle is endless. Khenti walks home as the sun sets, his body one continuous ache. Other workers walk the same route, all moving slowly, all showing the signs of a day's hard labor. No one talks much. Everyone is too tired. The workers' village where Khenti lives was built specifically to house the laborers building pyramids. Similar villages existed throughout Egypt wherever major construction projects were underway. The famous workers' village at Deir el-Medina, which housed the craftsmen who built the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, is the most well-documented example. These villages were self-contained communities with their own administration, food distribution systems, and social hierarchies. Workers received housing and rations as payment for their labor. It wasn't slavery, they were paid workers with specific contracts, but it wasn't freedom either. You lived where you were assigned, worked where you were told, and had limited ability to leave or change your circumstances. Khenti reaches his house just as darkness falls. Nefert has a small oil lamp burning, precious oil that must be used sparingly. The smell of cooking onions fills the small space. She's made a soup with onions and bread, flavored with a bit of salt. His children are already eating. Kamwasit looks up as his father enters. "How many bricks today, father?" 400, Khenti replies, lowering himself carefully onto a stool. "Everything hurts." "Same as always." "I helped mother grind grain," his daughter, Mutamwia, announces proudly. She's 8 and eager to prove her usefulness. "Good girl," Khenti says, managing a smile despite his exhaustion. Nefert brings him his portion of the soup and a cup of beer. She doesn't ask how his day was. She knows how it was. The same as every day. She simply sits beside him while he eats, her presence a quiet comfort. After eating, she brings out the oil, cheap oil, probably made from castor beans rather than the more expensive olive or morina oil. She takes his hands and begins rubbing the oil into his cracked skin, working it into the worst of the splits. It stings, but Khenti doesn't flinch. This is part of the routine. Part of the maintenance required to keep working. Without the oil, his hands would crack so badly he couldn't work. And if he can't work, the family doesn't eat. "The boy who was bitten by the snake," Nefert says quietly. "Did he survive?" "Don't know yet. They carried him away. We'll find out tomorrow." She nods, expecting this answer. Death and injury are familiar visitors in their world. You acknowledge them but don't dwell on them. Life continues whether you want it to or not. Khenti finishes his beer and feels the fatigue pulling at him. It's early still, but he can't stay awake any longer. His body demands rest. He lies down on his sleeping mat. Nefert lies beside him. The children are already asleep on their own mats in the corner. The lamp flickers, casting dancing shadows on the mud brick walls. Walls made from bricks just like the ones Khenti makes every day. This whole house, every building in the village, in the city, in all of Egypt, built from mud and straw shaped by hands like his. It's a strange thought. That his labor, boring and repetitive as it is, builds everything. The temples where priests make offerings to the gods. The granaries that store Egypt's wealth. The walls that protect the cities. All of it resting on the backs of men like him, making mud rectangles in the sun. Tomorrow, he'll do it again. 400 more bricks. And the day after that. And the day after that. This is his life. This is his purpose. The boring, essential, endless work of making bricks. And outside, the Nile flows on, as it has for thousands of years, as it will for thousands more. Indifferent to the struggles of men. Providing the mud and water that make the bricks possible. Flooding and receding in its eternal cycle. And Khenti sleeps, his body already beginning the slow recovery that will allow him to do it all again tomorrow. The next morning comes too soon. Khenti wakes to the same darkness, the same pre-dawn stillness. His body protests immediately, every muscle stiff, his hands throbbing despite the oil treatment, his back locked into a painful knot. He forces himself to sit up. Movement helps, eventually. The stiffness loosens as he moves through his morning routine. Splash water on his face. Eat the bread Nefert has prepared. Drink the weak beer that passes for breakfast. His hands are worse today. The cracks have deepened overnight, and several are bleeding slightly. He wraps them with strips of old linen, not to protect the clay from his blood, but to protect his hands from the constant moisture and abrasion of the work. Ancient Egyptian workers had various remedies for work-related injuries. Honey was applied to cuts and abrasions for its antibacterial properties, though workers like Khenti rarely had access to honey. More commonly, they used simple oils and fats, or a mixture of grease and herbs. Some workers bound their hands with leather strips or cloth to provide a barrier between skin and materials. Khenti leaves the house while his family still sleeps. The streets are already filling with workers, all heading in the same direction. They move like shadows in the dimness, a river of labor flowing toward the day's tasks. At the work yard, Khenti learns the fate of yesterday's snake bite victim. Dead. He died in the night, the venom overwhelming his body despite whatever treatments the healer attempted. His body has already been taken away for burial. The news spreads quickly through the workers. Some make protective gestures, small prayers to ward off similar fate. Others simply nod grimly, as if confirming something they already knew. Death is familiar here. Not welcomed, but not unexpected either. Panab makes a notation on his papyrus. One worker dead. The administrative machinery notes the loss and moves on. Someone else will be assigned to fill the dead man's quota. The work cannot stop for grief. Khenti's team gathers at their usual spot. The clay pit has been refilled overnight, fresh mud brought from the Nile, already mixed with water, ready for today's production. But first, they must deal with yesterday's defective bricks. 3 remakes, Panab announces, pointing to marked bricks from another team. Get them done before you start today's quota. This is the penalty for substandard work. You must remake the defective bricks on top of your regular quota. Which means working faster, longer, or both. There's no forgiveness in the system. No allowance for difficulty. Just the unyielding demand for production. Fortunately, Khenti's team has no remakes. They can start directly on today's quota. Small mercy. They begin the familiar process. Trampling the clay, mixing in the chopped straw. The straw comes from the threshing floors where grain is processed. What would otherwise be waste, the chaff and stalks left after separating the grain, becomes the essential ingredient that holds Egyptian bricks together. This recycling of agricultural waste was economically efficient. Egypt's prosperity was built on grain production, and every part of the harvest was utilized. The grain fed people and paid taxes. The straw made bricks. Even the stubble left in the fields was collected and burned for fuel or composted back into the soil. As they work the clay with their feet, Nat starts singing. It's a work song, one of dozens that brick makers know by heart. The lyrics are simple, repetitive, designed to match the rhythm of labor. Step and turn and step, mix the mud, don't forget, Pharaoh's city must be built, with our hands and sun and silt. Others join in, not because they're particularly joyful, but because singing helps. It passes the time. It creates rhythm. It transforms individual suffering into something communal, shared, slightly more bearable. Work songs were common across all types of Egyptian labor. Farmers sang while plowing. Sailors sang while rowing. Quarrymen sang while hauling stone. The songs served practical purposes, coordinating effort, maintaining pace, building group cohesion. But they also served psychological purposes, creating meaning and connection in the midst of difficult, repetitive work. The clay properly mixed, they move to the molding. Khenti takes his position, picks up his mold, and begins. Scoop. Slap. Press. Smooth. Lift. The first brick of the day. 399 more to go. The morning proceeds much like yesterday. The sun rises. The heat builds. The rows of bricks accumulate slowly behind each worker. The overseer makes his rounds, watching, counting, occasionally correcting someone's technique or yelling at someone for working too slowly. Around mid-morning, something different happens. A messenger arrives, a young scribe, carrying a scroll sealed with official marks. He speaks briefly with Panub, who reads the message and frowns. Then Panub calls out, "Listen. The overseer of overseers will visit tomorrow. The site must be immaculate. After work today, full cleanup. No exceptions." Groans ripple through the work yard. A full cleanup means extra time after an already exhausting day. Sweeping sand, organizing tools, straightening brick stacks, making everything look orderly and efficient for the visiting official. But there's no point in protesting. When higher officials visit, appearances matter. The administration wants to project efficiency and control. Workers who complain about extra duties might find themselves reassigned to worse positions. The quarries, for instance, where men haul massive stone blocks in conditions that make brick making look pleasant by comparison. The hierarchy of Egyptian labor was extensive and clearly defined. At the bottom were slaves and prisoners of war, assigned to the most brutal tasks. Above them were conscripted laborers, farmers fulfilling their annual labor obligation to the state. Then skilled workers like Khenti, who made bricks or crafted pottery or worked in specialized trades. Above them, foremen and overseers. then scribes and administrators. And at the top, priests and nobles who rarely touched manual tools. Movement between these levels was possible but uncommon. A particularly skilled craftsman might be promoted to foreman. A foreman might, with luck and connections, become a low-level administrator. But most people remained in the class they were born into, doing the work their fathers did, teaching their sons to do the same. Khenti returns his attention to his bricks. Thinking about hierarchies doesn't change his position in them. Doesn't make the clay lighter or the sun cooler. By midday, he's made his usual progress. Around 200 bricks. The midday break brings the familiar rations: bread, onions, beer. The workers cluster in whatever shade they can find, eating quickly, trying to rest before the afternoon shift. Khenti finds himself sitting near old Hori. The older man is breathing heavily, his face flushed despite being in shade. "You all right?" Khenti asks. Hori waves a hand dismissively. "Just old. Getting slower every year. Can feel my body giving out. You should ask for lighter duties. They sometimes assign older workers to sorting bricks or bundling straw." Hori snorts. "Lighter duties mean smaller rations. I have grandchildren to feed. My son died 2 years ago, fever took him. His widow and children live with me now. I need full rations." This was the trap many elderly workers found themselves in. They could request easier work, but easier work paid less, literally paid less, as rations were allocated based on the perceived difficulty and importance of one's labor. A man doing light duties received perhaps 2/3 the food of a man doing hard labor. So elderly workers often pushed themselves beyond their capabilities, trying to maintain full productivity to maintain full rations. And sometimes, their bodies simply gave out. Collapsed in the work yard. Heart failures. Strokes. Bodies worn out by decades of hard use simply stopping. Still, Khenti says, "Be careful. Don't push too hard." "We all push too hard," Hori replies. "That's the job." The horn sounds, calling them back to work. Khenti rises with effort, his brief rest having somehow made him more aware of his aches rather than less. The afternoon is brutal. The sun seems even hotter than yesterday, the air thick and still. Sweat runs continuously down Khenti's face, stinging his eyes, dripping onto the clay, becoming part of the mixture. He's at about 280 bricks when he hears the shout. Hori's down. Khenti turns to see old Hori collapsed beside his work area, his mold still in his hand, a half-formed brick at his feet. Several workers are rushing over. Khenti abandons his own work and runs to where Hori has fallen. The old man is conscious but barely, his breathing shallow and rapid, his face pale despite the heat. "Get the healer," someone shouts. But they all know it's serious. Hori's eyes have a distant quality, as if he's already leaving, his spirit beginning its journey to whatever comes next. Panab arrives and assesses the situation quickly. "Get him to the shade. Give him water. You 4. He points at Khenti and 3 others. "Divide his quota among yourselves. The day's production must still be met." It's harsh, but it's practical. One man's collapse doesn't stop the work. Can't stop the work. The bricks must be made. They carry Hori to the shade and make him as comfortable as possible. The healer arrives and examines him, but there's little to be done. Heat exhaustion, certainly. possibly heart failure. At Hori's age, with his years of hard labor, his body has simply reached its limit. Khenti returns to his workstation. He now has to make not just his remaining 120 bricks, but an additional 30 from Hori's quota. 150 bricks in perhaps 4 hours. It's going to be tight. He increases his pace, sacrificing some precision for speed. The bricks are slightly less perfect, but they'll pass inspection. They have to. There's no time to remake anything. Scoop. Slap. Press. Smooth. Lift. Faster now. Trying to find a rhythm that's sustainable but accelerated. His back screams in protest. His hands, already damaged, crack further. Blood mixes with the mud, absorbed into the bricks he's making. Part of him is literally going into these bricks now, his blood and sweat and pain baked into the building materials of Egypt. The sun descends toward the horizon. 300 bricks. 320. 350. He's so tired now that he's working in a kind of trance, not really conscious, just moving automatically. Around him, the others are doing the same. Everyone pushing beyond their normal limits because old Hori is dying in the shade and his quota must still be met. Finally, impossibly, Khenti places his last brick. 430. His quota plus his share of Hori's. He straightens up and feels something pop in his lower back. Pain lances through him, sharp and immediate. He gasps, grabs his back, nearly falls. Easy, Ammonius says, appearing at his side. You overdid it. Had to, Khenti manages through gritted teeth. The quota. I know. Come on. Sit down. Ammonius helps him to the shade where Hori lies. The old man is still breathing, but barely. His eyes are closed. He looks smaller somehow, as if death is already shrinking him. Did we make it? Hori whispers, his eyes fluttering open briefly. We made it, Khenti lies. He doesn't actually know if the team's total quota was met. But Hori doesn't need uncertainty in what might be his final moments. Good, Hori breathes. Good. His eyes close again. The day ends. The inspection happens. The team's total is counted, just barely over 2,000 bricks. They made it. At tremendous cost, but they made it. Hori is carried away by his family. He'll likely die tonight or tomorrow. His working life is over. Whether his actual life is over will be determined by the gods or fate or simple biology. The cleanup begins. Despite their exhaustion, despite everything, the workers sweep and straighten and organize. Because tomorrow, an important official is visiting. And appearances must be maintained. Khenti works through the pain in his back, through the bleeding hands, through the exhaustion that makes every movement feel like wading through sand. Finally, they're dismissed. Khenti limps home, each step an effort. This is what brick-making costs. Your body. Your health. Your years. And tomorrow, he'll do it again. Because the quota never changes. The work never stops. The boring, brutal, endless life of an Egyptian brick-maker. Khenti barely sleeps that night. The pain in his back is constant, sharp whenever he shifts position. Nefert tries to help, rubbing more oil into his muscles, but there's only so much oil can do. Some injuries require time, rest. Things that brick makers don't have the luxury of. When dawn comes, Khenti seriously considers not going to work. The pain is that bad. But not going means no rations. And worse, it means questions. Are you truly injured, or just lazy? Can you still work, or are you becoming useless? In ancient Egypt, there was a sick leave system, at least for some workers. Records from Deir el-Medina show that workers could take days off for illness, with reasons recorded by scribes. Eye pain. Brewing beer for the family. Bitten by a scorpion. These absences were noted but generally accepted as part of life. However, the system varied greatly depending on who you worked for and what kind of work you did. Royal tomb workers had more privileges than common laborers. Skilled craftsmen had more flexibility than brick makers. And even when sick leave was permitted, extended absences could result in reduced rations or replacement by younger, healthier workers. Khenti decides to go. He'll work through the pain. Countless workers have done the same before him. He wraps his back with strips of linen, binding it tight to provide some support. It helps a little. Not much, but a little. Then he drinks an extra portion of beer, not for pleasure, but as pain management. The slight dulling effect of the fermented grain might take the edge off. At the work yard, news has spread about Hori. The old man died in the night, his body simply giving out after decades of labor. His family is preparing for burial, a simple affair, nothing like the elaborate preparations of the wealthy, but a burial nonetheless. Hori's spot in the team has already been filled. A younger man, perhaps 18, stands nervously where Hori worked yesterday. His name is Taotep, and this is his first week as a brick maker. He was recently conscripted from his village to fulfill his labor obligation. Egyptian labor worked on a corvée system, a form of taxation where citizens owed the state a certain amount of labor each year. For farmers, this usually meant 1 to 3 months of work on state projects during the flood season when their fields were underwater and they couldn't farm anyway. Some served in the military. Others worked on construction projects, temples, palaces, tombs, irrigation systems. And many, like Taotep, ended up making bricks. It wasn't a choice. It was an obligation, enforced by the state, with penalties for those who tried to avoid it. You'll work beside Khenti today, Panab tells the young man. Watch him. Learn from him. By next week, you need to be producing full quota. Taotep nods nervously. He looks strong enough, farm work builds muscle, but he also looks overwhelmed. The scale of the operation, the heat, the relentless pace, it's a lot to take in. Khenti remembers his own first days as a brick maker. The shock of the work. The realization that this wasn't for a day or a week, but potentially for years. For life. Stay close, Khenti tells him. Watch how I do it. Don't try to work too fast at first. You'll just tire yourself out and make mistakes. They begin the morning trampling. Taotep steps into the clay pit enthusiastically, his young legs strong and fresh. Khenti moves more carefully, testing his back with each step. The pain is there, constant, but manageable if he doesn't make any sudden movements. As they work, Khenti explains the process. The straw has to be mixed evenly. See how I turn the clay with my feet? You're not just walking through it. You're folding it, turning it over, making sure every part gets straw. Taotep listens intently, trying to mimic Khenti's movements. He's clumsy at first, but he's trying. That counts for something. The clay prepared, they move to the molding. Khenti demonstrates. You want to grab more clay than you think you need. See? Pack it down firmly. No air pockets. Those cause cracking. Press into the corners especially. The corners are what make it a brick instead of just a lump. Taotep tries his first brick. He doesn't use enough clay, and when he lifts the mold, the brick is too thin, already deforming. A failure. That's all right, Khenti says. Everyone's first dozen are terrible. Scrape it back into the clay pit and try again. The training of new workers was essential but time-consuming. Experienced brick makers had to slow their own production to teach newcomers, which meant the team's overall output suffered until the new worker reached competency. This created tension, veterans resenting having to carry extra weight, newcomers feeling the pressure of letting their team down. But it was necessary. Brick makers died, like Hori. Others completed their labor obligation and returned home. The workforce was constantly turning over, and knowledge had to be passed down continuously or the whole system would collapse. By mid-morning, Taotep has made perhaps 20 usable bricks. It's a start. Khenti has made his usual 100 or so, though each one cost him more than usual, his back protesting with every bend. The announcement comes during the midday break. The overseer of overseers has arrived. All workers are to assemble for inspection. The brick makers gather in the center of the yard, arranged by teams. Khenti stands with his group, trying to appear alert and capable despite his pain. The overseer of overseers arrives in a litter carried by 4 men. He doesn't walk if he can help it. He's older, well-fed, wearing fine white linen and several pieces of jewelry that mark his status. Several scribes accompany him, ready to record whatever he observes. This level of official rarely visited the actual work sites. He managed from an office somewhere, reviewing reports, making decisions based on numbers written on papyrus. Being here in person meant something significant was happening. He surveys the assembled workers with the expression of someone examining cattle. Assessing value. Calculating productivity. I have reviewed the production records for this site, he announces, his voice carrying across the yard. Your quota has been met consistently. This is acceptable. A pause. Everyone waits for the other part. There's always another part. However, the quality inspections show an increase in defective bricks. 5% defect rate, up from 3% last month. This is unacceptable. Khenti's stomach tightens. Higher defect rates mean tighter scrutiny, harsher enforcement, potentially reduced rations if the problem continues. The standards must be maintained, the official continues. Each brick represents Pharaoh's greatness. Sloppy work dishonors him, dishonors Egypt, dishonors the gods themselves. This rhetoric was common in ancient Egyptian work sites. Labor wasn't just economic, it was religious, patriotic, cosmic. You weren't just making bricks. You were serving Pharaoh, who was himself a god. You were participating in Ma'at, the divine order that held the universe together. Whether the workers actually believed this is unclear. Probably some did, their genuine faith making the work more meaningful. Others just nodded along, knowing that expressing skepticism about serving Pharaoh was dangerous. Foreman Panub, the official says, turning to the overseer. You will personally inspect every 10th brick. Teams with defect rates above 3% will be reassigned to quarry work. The threat hangs in the air. Quarry work. Breaking and hauling stone. Some workers never return from the quarries, their bodies simply used up by the brutal labor. The inspection continues. The official walks through the brick rows, occasionally stopping to examine a brick more closely. The scribes follow, noting things on their papyrus sheets. The whole process takes perhaps an hour, while the workers stand in the sun, waiting, sweating, anxious. Finally, it's over. The official departs in his litter, and the workers are dismissed back to their stations. You heard him, Panab says grimly. 3% or less. Check your work. Every brick. I'm not sending anyone to the quarries if I can help it, but I will if I have to. The afternoon work begins with renewed tension. Everyone is more careful now, taking extra time to ensure proper corners, smooth surfaces, even thickness. It slows production, which creates another pressure: meet the quota but also meet quality standards. The two demands pulling in opposite directions. Khenti works with focused concentration despite his pain. Each brick must be perfect, or at least good enough to pass inspection. He can't be the one whose defects send the team to the quarries. Taotep is struggling. His bricks are improving, but slowly. Some are still too thin or poorly shaped. Khenti has to discreetly remake several of the worst ones, adding to his own workload. I'm sorry, the young man says miserably. I'm trying. I know. It gets easier. Just keep practicing. But privately, Khenti wonders if Taotep will make it. Some people never develop the knack for brick making. Their hands don't learn the right pressure, their eyes don't judge thickness correctly. Those people usually get reassigned to carrying bricks, to mixing clay, to other tasks that don't require the precision of molding. The sun descends. 300 bricks. 350. 400. Khenti reaches his quota just as the shadows grow long. His back is on fire. His hands are bleeding through the linen wrappings. He's so tired that he's shaking. But he made it. 400 bricks. The quota met. Another day survived. Panab makes his rounds, inspecting the day's production with unusual care. He marks several bricks from various teams, but not many. Most pass. The threat of the quarries has motivated careful work. Acceptable, Panab announces to Khenti's team. 2 defects out of 2,000. Within standards. Relief washes through the group. They're safe. For today, at least. The cleanup is brief, the visiting official is gone, so there's no need for extra presentation. The workers scatter quickly, eager to get home, to rest, to stop moving. Khenti walks slowly, each step deliberate. Taotep walks beside him, also moving carefully, his young body already learning the aches that come with this work. Does it always hurt this much? The young man asks. Yes, Khenti says honestly. You get used to it. Sort of. The pain becomes familiar. Normal. You stop noticing it as much. I don't think I can do this for 3 months. 3 months was the typical corvée obligation for a farmer. 3 months of making bricks before returning to his village, to his own fields, to his own life. You'll do it, Khenti says. Because you have to. Because there's no alternative. And 3 months will pass. Slowly, but it will pass. For Khenti, there's no end point. This isn't 3 months of obligation. This is his life. His profession. His identity. He's a brick maker. Will always be a brick maker. Until his body gives out like Hori's did, or until some other fate claims him. They reach the workers' village. Taotep turns toward the temporary barracks where corvée workers are housed, long communal buildings, much less private than the small family houses of permanent workers. "Thank you," Taotep says. "For teaching me. For not being angry when I messed up." "We all messed up at first," Khenti replies. "Tomorrow will be easier." "A little." He watches the young man trudge toward the barracks, then continues to his own house. Inside, Nefert has food waiting. The children are already eating. Kamwasit looks up as his father enters. "Father, I learned a new hieroglyph today. The symbol for water. The teacher says I'm doing well." Khenti freezes. "Teacher? What teacher?" Nefert steps forward. "I've been taking him to the scribe school. Just to watch. The teacher noticed him and has been giving him small lessons. Nothing official. Just teaching him when there's time. We can't afford. It costs nothing. The teacher is doing it out of kindness. He says Kamwasit has aptitude." Khenti looks at his son. The boy's eyes are bright with excitement, with possibility. The hieroglyph he's drawn on a pottery shard is crude but recognizable. The 3 wavy lines that represent water, one of the fundamental signs of Egyptian writing. Literacy was rare in ancient Egypt. Perhaps 1% of the population could read and write. Scribes formed an elite class, their skills giving them access to administrative positions, temple roles, opportunities far beyond what manual laborers could ever hope for. If Kamwasit could truly learn to read and write, if he could become a scribe, he could escape the brick yards. Could have a different life. A better life. But the odds are so long. The scribe schools are selective. Competition is fierce. Most students come from families with connections, with influence. Still, Khenti looks at his son's eager face and can't bring himself to discourage this small hope. "Keep learning," he says quietly. "Work hard." Maybe. He doesn't finish the sentence. Doesn't want to promise something that might not happen. But for the first time in years, Khenti feels something other than resignation. A tiny spark of possibility. That his son's life might be different. Might be better. It's a small thing. A fragile thing. But it's something. He eats his meal. Nefert tends his back and hands. The children settle for sleep. And Khenti lies down, exhausted, in pain, but carrying that small spark. Tomorrow, more bricks. 400 more. Always 400 more. But maybe, just maybe, his son won't have to make them. The days begin to blur together. One morning becomes another. One row of bricks becomes another. The pain in Khenti's back never fully heals, it just becomes part of him, a constant companion that flares with certain movements but never truly disappears. This is the reality of long-term manual labor. Injuries accumulate. The body adapts as best it can, but adaptation has limits. Khenti is only 32, but he moves like a man 20 years older. This is the price of brick making. It's been 3 weeks since Hori died. Taotep has improved significantly. He can now make his full quota of 400 bricks, though his technique is still rougher than the veterans. But he stopped making obvious mistakes, stopped producing the kinds of defects that get teams sent to the quarries. The young man has also stopped talking about how much it hurts. He's learned what all brick makers eventually learn: complaining doesn't help. Doesn't change anything. You just do the work and endure. Today brings something different, though. A change in the routine. Panab announces it during the morning assembly. New orders from the administrators. The Great Temple complex requires special bricks. Larger size. Different proportions. A team will be selected to produce them. This creates a stir among the workers. Special orders usually mean different conditions. Sometimes better, lighter work, special rations. Sometimes worse, tighter deadlines, impossible standards. The dimensions are 1.5 times standard size, Panab continues. Same quota, 2,000 bricks per team per day. Murmurs of disbelief ripple through the assembled workers. Larger bricks mean more clay per brick, more time to mold each one, heavier lifting. Making 2,000 larger bricks in the same time it takes to make 2,000 standard bricks is difficult. Maybe impossible. But arguing with orders from the temple administration is pointless. The bricks are needed for sacred construction. The timeline is set by priests and architects who've never made a brick in their lives. The workers will simply have to figure out how to meet the demand. Khenti's team, Panab says. You'll handle the special order. You're one of the more consistent teams. The temple priests want quality work. Khenti feels his stomach drop. It's ostensibly an honor, recognition of their skill and reliability. But it's also a burden. A test. Fail to meet the quota, and the consequences will be severe. Ancient Egyptian temple construction was considered sacred work. The temples were homes for the gods, and everything associated with them carried religious significance. Workers who built temples were supposedly blessed, touched by divine purpose. In reality, they were just workers doing difficult jobs, but the religious framing added extra pressure. To fail at temple work wasn't just professional failure, it was spiritual failure, offense against the gods. Khenti's team gathers at their workstation. The new molds have already been delivered, wooden frames noticeably larger than the standard ones. Nakt picks one up, testing its weight. This is going to be brutal, he says simply. We'll manage, Ammonius replies, though his tone lacks conviction. We always manage. They begin with the clay preparation. Larger bricks require more clay, which means more trampling, more mixing. The clay pit needs to be deeper, the mixture more thorough. They spend an extra hour on preparation alone. Finally, they're ready to begin molding. Khenti places the larger mold on the prepared ground. It looks enormous compared to the standard size. He scoops clay, needing both hands now, the amount much greater, and slaps it into the mold. Immediately, he feels the difference. The weight. The strain on his already injured back as he bends and lifts. This is going to be worse than he thought. He packs the clay down, working it into the corners. With the larger surface area, this takes longer. Every step of the process is slower, more demanding. Finally, he lifts the mold away. One brick. Complete. He looks at it and does the math in his head. If this brick took perhaps twice as long as a standard brick, and they need to make 400, that's roughly 800 standard bricks worth of time and effort. Impossible. Or nearly so. But they have no choice. They begin working. Scoop. Slap. Press. Smooth. Lift. The familiar rhythm, but heavier now, slower, more exhausting. By mid-morning, Khenti has made perhaps 40 bricks. He's badly behind his usual pace. The others are in similar situations. Senab, always the steadiest, is visibly struggling. The young Taotep looks overwhelmed, his movements already growing sloppy with fatigue. The midday break comes as a relief. They collapse in the shade, breathing hard, bodies aching. "We're not going to make it," Matt says quietly. "At this rate, we'll be lucky to hit 1,500 bricks. We're 400 short." "So we work faster after the break," Ammonius suggests, but everyone knows it's not that simple. You can't just decide to work faster. Your body has limits. Push beyond them, and you make mistakes, create defects, potentially injure yourself. "Maybe we can negotiate a lower quota," Taotep suggests hopefully. The veterans look at him with something like pity. The young man still doesn't understand how the system works. "There's no negotiation," Khenti explains. "The quota is set. We meet it or we face consequences. That's the system." Egyptian labor management operated on strict hierarchies and clear expectations. Quotas were determined by administrators based on estimated capabilities, past performance, and the needs of the project. Workers had virtually no input in setting these standards. You could appeal if you felt a quota was genuinely impossible, but such appeals rarely succeeded and could mark you as a troublemaker. The alternative was to underperform and face the penalties. Reduced rations, which hurt not just you but your family. Reassignment to worse work. In extreme cases, physical punishment. The system was designed to extract maximum productivity, and it did so effectively, if brutally. "Then what do we do?" Taotep asks. Khenti looks at his team. They're all exhausted already, and the day is only half over. But he sees something in their faces. Determination. The stubborn refusal to quit that keeps workers going when everything tells them to stop. "We keep working," he says. "We work through the breaks. We stay late if necessary. We make the quota because the alternative is unacceptable." They nod. Even young Taotep, scared as he is, nods. Because what choice do they have? The afternoon becomes a test of endurance. They work through the usual afternoon break, sacrificing rest to gain production time. They work faster than is comfortable, pushing their bodies beyond safe limits. Khenti feels something tear in his shoulder around mid-afternoon, not catastrophically, but a pull, a strain that will hurt for weeks. He keeps working. Senab develops a nosebleed from the heat and exertion, blood dripping onto the clay, becoming part of the bricks. He keeps working. Taotep vomits from heat exhaustion and overexertion. He wipes his mouth and keeps working. This is what meeting impossible quotas requires. Pushing through pain, through sickness, through the body's protests. There's a kind of madness to it, Khenti thinks. A collective insanity where 5 men destroy themselves for the sake of meeting an arbitrary number set by people who've never done this work. But it's also something else. Pride, maybe. Stubbornness. the refusal to be defeated by mud and wood and the demands of uncaring administrators. They'll make their quota not because they want to, but because they refuse to fail. The sun touches the horizon. Other teams are finishing, cleaning up, heading home. Khenti's team keeps working. The light is fading, making it harder to see, but they continue. 350 bricks. 380. 400. Khenti reaches his personal quota just as the last light disappears. The others finish within minutes of each other. 2,000 bricks. Exactly. The quota met. They've done it. At tremendous cost, but they've done it. They stand among their completed work, too exhausted to feel triumphant. Just done. Finished. Surviving another day. Panab comes over to inspect. Even he looks impressed, or as close to impressed as overseers get. Acceptable work, he says, walking through the rows, checking quality. Temple standard. You'll do the same tomorrow. Tomorrow. Of course. This wasn't a one-time effort. This is their assignment now. 2,000 larger bricks, every day, until the temple's needs are met. Which could be weeks. Months. The realization settles over them like a weight. This is their new normal. This level of exhaustion, this level of pain, every single day. How long? Khenti asks. How long do we produce these? Panab shrugs. Until the temple builders have what they need. Could be a month. Could be 2. You'll be informed when the order is complete. He leaves them standing in the darkness, among their 2,000 oversized bricks, facing the prospect of doing it all again tomorrow. They clean up in silence, too tired for conversation. Then they begin to walk home. Khenti moves like an old man. Each step is an effort. His back, his shoulder, his hands, his legs, everything hurts. He's not sure how he'll do this again tomorrow. Doesn't know where he'll find the strength. But he will. Because he must. Because his family depends on the rations his work provides. Because stopping isn't an option. At home, Nefret takes one look at him and her face goes tight with concern. What happened? Special order. Larger bricks. Same quota. His voice is hoarse from the day's exertion and the dust. She helps him sit down, brings him water and food. He can barely eat. His body is too exhausted to even process nourishment properly. The children are already asleep. Kamlasit's pottery shard with his hieroglyphs sits on the table. He's been practicing. Learning. Khenti looks at it and feels a surge of desperate hope. His son has to make it as a scribe. Has to escape this life. Because this breaking of bodies for mud rectangles, this cannot be what's passed to the next generation. I can't do this much longer, Khenti whispers to Nefret. My body, it's giving out. She doesn't try to reassure him with false comfort. She just holds his damaged hands in hers. I know, she says quietly. But what choice do we have? What choice indeed? This is the question that defines the lives of Egyptian workers. What choice do you have when the system demands your labor, when your survival depends on meeting quotas, when stopping means destitution or death? No choice. That's the answer. You continue because continuing is the only option. Khenti lies down, and despite his exhaustion, sleep doesn't come easily. His body is too wound up, too damaged, too overwhelmed by the day's abuse. He stares at the ceiling, made of bricks, of course, bricks made by someone like him, and thinks about tomorrow. About the 2,000 bricks waiting to be made. About the day after that. About the endless procession of days stretching into an unknowable future. Somewhere in the city, in the great temple complex, his bricks from today are being incorporated into sacred walls. Becoming part of something permanent, something that might last thousands of years. But Khenti won't see it. Won't know which wall his bricks built. Won't receive acknowledgement or recognition. He's just the maker. The labor. The hands that shape the mud. His work will outlast him by millennia. But his name will be forgotten. His suffering unrecorded. His life reduced to numbers in an administrator's ledger. Worker, brickmaker, quota met. And tomorrow, he'll wake up and do it again. Make 400 more bricks. Push his failing body through one more impossible day. The boring, brutal, anonymous life of an Egyptian brickmaker. Building eternity, one mud rectangle at a time, while his own body crumbles, unnoticed, unmourned. 3 weeks pass. 3 weeks of the larger bricks. 3 weeks of pushing beyond what seems possible, only to wake up and do it again. Khenti's body is breaking down in ways that can't be ignored anymore. His right shoulder barely functions. He has to scoop clay with his left hand now, awkward and slower. His back has developed a constant spasm that makes bending a careful, painful negotiation. His hands are more scar than skin at this point. But he continues. They all continue. Because the alternative is starvation. The team has developed a grim efficiency. They know exactly how to pace themselves now, how to distribute the work to compensate for each other's weaknesses. When Khenti's shoulder won't cooperate, Ammonius quietly makes a few extra bricks. When Senab's old knee injury flares up, the others pick up his slack. It's unspoken, but understood. They survive as a unit or not at all. This mutual dependence was common among Egyptian work teams. The quota system created incentives for cooperation. If one team member failed, the whole team suffered. So workers learned to support each other, to cover for weaknesses, to function as a collective unit rather than as individuals. It wasn't altruism, exactly. It was survival strategy. But the practical result was a form of solidarity, bonds forged through shared suffering. Today, something changes. A messenger arrives mid-morning with news for Panub. There's a brief conversation, and then Panub calls for work to stop. Unusual. Work never stops during production hours. The brickmakers gather, curious and weary. Changes are rarely good news. The inundation has begun early, Panub announces. The Nile is rising. Flood levels are expected to be high this year. The inundation, the annual flooding of the Nile. The event that defined Egyptian life, Egyptian agriculture, Egyptian survival. Every year, between June and September, the river would swell with water from distant rains in the Ethiopian highlands. It would overflow its banks, covering the fields with nutrient-rich silt, making Egypt's agricultural prosperity possible. The flood was so central to Egyptian life that their calendar was organized around it. The year had 3 seasons, Ake, the inundation, Parate, the growing season, and Shimu, the harvest. Everything revolved around this cycle. The clay pits near the river will flood within days, Panub continues. We're moving operations to higher ground. Temporary work yard, reduced capacity. Quotas will be adjusted. Murmurs of surprise and relief ripple through the workers. Adjusted quotas. Lower production requirements during the flood season. It's not rest, exactly, but it's closer to manageable. However, panic adds, and everyone tenses. There's always a however. We need to move all existing brick stocks to dry storage immediately. All teams will work double shifts for the next 3 days. No exceptions. The relief evaporates. Double shifts. 2 12-hour work periods back to back. 24 hours of labor with only brief breaks. It's brutal, but necessary. Bricks caught by the flood would be destroyed, all that work wasted. The relocation begins immediately. The work transforms from making bricks to moving them. Teams form human chains, passing bricks hand to hand from the drying yards to higher ground storage areas. This is different labor than brick making, but no less exhausting. The bricks are heavy, each one perhaps 5 pounds, the larger temple bricks even more. Moving thousands of them means lifting, carrying, stacking, over and over, for hours. Khenti takes a position in the middle of a human chain. Bricks come to him from his left, he pivots and passes them to his right. Catch, turn, pass. Catch, turn, pass. A different repetitive motion, but repetitive nonetheless. The physical demands of different types of labor in ancient Egypt varied significantly, but all manual labor took a toll. Quarry workers hauled massive stones. Farmers plowed fields and harvested grain. Sailors rowed boats and hauled cargo. Brick makers made and moved bricks. Each profession had its own specific injuries and ailments, but all shared the common experience of bodies worn out by work. The day stretches endlessly. Catch, turn, pass. Thousands of times. Tens of thousands. The sun arcs across the sky. Break for water. Brief rest. Then back to the chain. By nightfall, they've moved perhaps half the bricks. The work continues by torchlight. The flickering flames cast strange shadows, making the brick yards look almost otherworldly. Workers move like shadows themselves, exhausted beyond speech, operating on pure muscle memory. Khenti's world narrows to the next brick. The next pass. Nothing else exists. Not pain, not thought, just the motion. Catch, turn, pass. Midnight comes and goes. They work through it. Some workers collapse and are carried aside, replaced by others. The work cannot stop. The Nile is rising. Every hour counts. Finally, near dawn, it's done. All the bricks move to safety. The workers collapse where they stand, too exhausted to even walk home. Some sleep right there in the work yard, curled up on the ground, dead to the world. Khenti manages to make it home, though he barely remembers the walk. He falls onto his sleeping mat and immediately loses consciousness. Not sleep, exactly. More like his body simply shutting down, taking rest by force. He wakes to find it's afternoon. He's slept perhaps 8 hours. His body is screaming at him, every muscle locked up, joints swollen, hands barely able to close into fists. Nefret is there with food. He eats mechanically, not tasting, just refueling. The children, he asks. Fine. Worried about you. You looked half dead when you came home. Feel half dead. You need to rest. Your body needs time to recover. Can't double shift again tonight. Need to finish the relocation. She doesn't argue. She knows as well as he does that missing work isn't an option. She just helps him prepare, wraps his hands fresh, rubs oil into his worst joints, makes sure he eats enough to sustain another night of labor. Ancient Egyptian workers had limited understanding of physiology, but they understood practically what their bodies needed. Rest, food, water, and the treatment of obvious injuries. They didn't have concepts like repetitive stress injury or chronic inflammation, but they experienced these conditions and developed folk remedies to manage them. Khenti returns to the workyard as evening approaches. The second night of double shifts begins. More bricks to move. More hours of catch, turn, pass. But something is different tonight. The workers are moving slower, their exhaustion deeper. Several collapse within the first hour. The human chains keep breaking down as people simply can't continue. Panab is growing frustrated. We need to finish tonight. The flood is coming faster than expected. But yelling at exhausted workers doesn't give them more energy. Doesn't make damaged bodies function better. The pace continues to slow despite his demands. Around midnight, one of the workers, a man named Amenhotep, normally strong and capable, collapses mid-lift. The brick he's holding falls, landing on the foot of the worker beside him. There's a crunch, a scream. Broken bones. The injured worker is carried away. Amenhotep is revived with water, but he's clearly done. His body has simply quit. And then, something unusual happens. The workers begin to stop. One by one, they step out of the chains, sit down, refuse to continue. It's not organized. Not planned. Just individual decisions, spreading through the group like ripples on water. One person stops, then another, then another. Work stoppages were rare but not unheard of in ancient Egypt. The workers at Deir el-Medina famously went on strike when their rations weren't delivered on time, one of the earliest recorded labor strikes in history. Usually, though, workers endured rather than protested, because the consequences of organized resistance could be severe. But this isn't organized resistance. It's just people reaching their limits. Bodies that can no longer continue, regardless of consequences. Panab is furious. Get back to work. This is insubordination. You'll be punished. But his threats ring hollow. You can't punish people who are physically incapable of working. And more importantly, if enough people stop, if the collective simply refuses to continue, what can one overseer do? For a long moment, there's a standoff. Panab standing with his stick, facing dozens of seated workers who simply can't. Can't work another hour. Can't lift another brick. Can't continue. Finally, a figure emerges from the administrative area. A higher official, drawn by the commotion. He assesses the situation quickly. How much is left to move? He asks Panab. Perhaps a quarter of the total. If we work through the night. The workers are finished, the official interrupts. Look at them. You'll kill half of them if you push further. But the bricks are bricks. We can make more. Dead workers are harder to replace. The official turns to address the workers. Rest. You'll resume at dawn. We'll accept whatever losses the flood brings. It's pragmatic rather than compassionate. Workers are valuable resources. Breaking them unnecessarily is poor management. But the result is the same: permission to stop. To rest. The workers don't cheer or celebrate. They're too tired. They just remain seated, grateful for the reprieve. Khenti walks home in the pre-dawn darkness. His body is beyond pain now. It's moved into a kind of numbness, a shutdown of sensation. He knows he'll pay for this tomorrow, that the accumulated damage will assert itself once he's rested enough to feel again. But for now, there's just the relief of stopping. Of being allowed to be human again, even briefly. At home, he collapses. Nefret doesn't ask questions. She just covers him with a blanket and lets him sleep. He dreams of bricks. Endless bricks. Catch, turn, pass. Scoop, slap, press. The motions have embedded themselves so deeply that even in sleep, he can't escape them. When he wakes, it's late afternoon again. He's slept nearly a full day. His body is stiff beyond belief, but he's alive. Still functional, if barely. The flood has come. He can hear it, the sound of water, higher than usual, the Nile asserting its annual dominance over the land. Some of the unmoved bricks were lost. Months of work washed away in hours. But the loss is acceptable. Calculated. Part of the cycle. The temporary work yard on higher ground is being established. Operations will resume soon, but with reduced quotas. The flood season means different work patterns, less brick making, more maintenance tasks, preparation for when the waters recede and construction can resume in full. It's almost like a rest. Almost. But not quite. Because there's no true rest for workers. Just variations in intensity of labor. Khenti sits in his small courtyard, watching the flood waters in the distance. Every year, the Nile rises. Every year, it recedes. Every year, the cycle continues, indifferent to human effort, human suffering, human hopes. He's been making bricks for 15 years. His father made bricks before him. His son, he glances toward the house where Kamwasit is practicing his hieroglyphs. His son might escape this cycle. Or he might not. The world is unpredictable. Plans fail. Hopes disappoint. But for now, in this moment, there's rest. Brief and temporary, but real. The boring daily life of an Egyptian brickmaker. Sometimes brutal beyond endurance. Sometimes just boring. Repetitive. Endless. But punctuated by moments like this. Sitting in fading light, body too damaged to work, watching the floodwaters rise, and simply existing. Not producing. Not serving quotas. Just being. Tomorrow, the cycle will continue. More bricks. More quotas. More wearing down of flesh and bone. But tomorrow is not now. And now, finally, is rest. The flood season brings a different rhythm to life. The Nile has claimed the low-lying areas, including the usual brick-making yards near the riverbanks. The temporary work site on higher ground is smaller, more cramped, but functional. The quotas, as promised, have been reduced. Khenti's team now produces 1,500 bricks per day instead of 2,000. It seems like a mercy at first, 300 fewer bricks each, 120 fewer for Khenti personally. But the work is still exhausting, still relentless. just slightly less impossible than before. The flood season traditionally brought changes to the labor force. Many workers were conscripted farmers who returned to their villages during the inundation, not to farm, since their fields were underwater, but to repair homes, maintain tools, and prepare for the next growing season. This meant that work crews shrank during the flood months, and those who remained carried the burden of continued production. Khenti is one of those who remains. Brickmaking isn't seasonal work for him. It's year-round. Permanent. The city needs bricks regardless of the river's moods, and someone must make them. The reduced team means he's working alongside some men he doesn't know as well. The familiar faces of his usual crew are joined by workers from other teams, combined now into larger units to maintain production. One of these new workers is an older man named Yehudi. He's perhaps 45, which is ancient for a brick maker. His hands are so deformed by decades of work that they barely look human anymore, swollen knuckles, fingers that won't straighten, permanent clay stains ground into every crease. Been doing this since I was younger than your boy there, Yehudi tells Khenti, nodding toward Taotep. 30 years of bricks. My father did it before me. His father before him. It's what we do. Did you ever think about doing something else? Khenti asks. Yehudi laughs, a dry, humorless sound. Think about it every day. But thinking doesn't change anything. You're born into a position, you do the work required of that position. That's the order of things. The concept of Ma'at, cosmic order, divine balance, was central to Egyptian worldview. Everything had its proper place, its assigned role. Pharaoh ruled because the gods ordained it. Priests served the temples because that was their position. And workers made bricks because that was theirs. To accept your place was to maintain Ma'at. To resist was to invite chaos. Whether common people truly believed this or simply found it a convenient way to explain their circumstances is unclear. Probably some of both. Belief and resignation are hard to separate when you have no other options. The work continues. Scoop, slap, press, smooth, lift. The motions are so embedded in Khenti's body now that he could probably do them in his sleep. Sometimes, in the heat of the afternoon when exhaustion makes his mind wander, he's not sure if he's awake or dreaming. The bricks appear behind him like products of some automatic process, his hands shaping them without conscious thought. During the midday break, Yehudi shares his bread with Khenti. It's an unusual gesture, rations are carefully measured, and sharing means having less for yourself. My wife died last year, Yehudi explains. No children. I get full rations but only need half. The rest just sits in my house, going stale. I'm sorry, Khenti says. About your wife. She worked in the weaving workshops. Good worker. Strong. But the cough took her. Just wore her down until there was nothing left. Respiratory diseases were common in ancient Egypt, particularly among workers in dusty environments. Weavers inhaled fibers. Stoneworkers breathed dust. Even brick makers were exposed to fine clay particles and smoke from fires. Without any understanding of lung disease or protective equipment, these conditions simply claimed lives, accepted as another hazard of work. You could remarry, Khenti suggests. Find someone to share the burden. Yehudi shakes his head. At my age? With this body? What woman would want that? No, I'll finish my days alone. Work until I can't anymore, then, whatever comes next. There's a resignation in his voice that chills Khenti. This is what awaits him. Years more of brick making, body deteriorating, until finally it gives out completely. Then a simple burial, his name forgotten, his life reduced to nothing more than the millions of bricks he produced. Is that all there is? All there ever will be? He thinks of composite, of the hieroglyphs his son is learning, of the possibility, remote but real, that his son might escape this fate. That possibility is what keeps Khenti going. Not hope for himself, but hope for the next generation. The afternoon's work is interrupted by another unusual occurrence. A procession passes near the workyard, a religious ceremony of some kind. Priests in white linen, carrying sacred objects, chanting prayers to the gods. The workers are expected to stop and show respect, bowing their heads as the procession passes. Khenti watches from a distance. The priests are well-fed, clean, moving with the confidence of people whose bodies aren't breaking down from labor. They serve the gods, yes, but they serve in comfort, in prestige, in conditions that couldn't be more different from the brickyard. Religious life in ancient Egypt was stratified like everything else. At the top were the high priests, often nobles, who oversaw major temples and wielded significant political power. Below them were ranks of lesser priests, performing rituals, maintaining temple properties, managing the vast economic enterprises that temples controlled. And at the very bottom were the workers who built and maintained the physical temples, the masons, carpenters, plasterers, and brick makers whose labor created the sacred spaces but who rarely participated in the rituals performed within them. The procession passes. The workers return to their tasks. The brief moment of something different dissolves back into the familiar routine. Days pass. Then weeks. The Nile remains high, the floodwaters covering the fields. In the villages, farmers wait for the waters to recede, for the silt to be deposited, for the cycle to continue. In the city, workers continue their tasks, adapted to the seasonal changes but never stopping entirely. Khenti develops a new problem. His eyesight is deteriorating. Not dramatically, but noticeably. He has trouble seeing details on bricks from a distance, has to squint in bright sunlight. It's probably a combination of factors: sun damage, age, the constant exposure to reflected glare off water and sand. Vision problems were common among Egyptian workers, particularly those who worked outdoors. The brilliant sun, the reflective surfaces, the lack of any eye protection, all contributed to early deterioration of sight. Some workers developed cataracts in their 40s. Others simply lost visual acuity gradually, making precision work increasingly difficult. For a brick maker, declining vision is a serious problem. You need to see the clay's consistency, judge the thickness of bricks, spot defects. Khenti finds himself making more mistakes, producing bricks that don't quite meet standards. Panab notices. Your quality is slipping, he observes during an inspection. 3 defects this week. That's unacceptable. My eyes, Khenti admits. I'm having trouble seeing clearly. Panab frowns. Can you still work? Yes. I just need to be more careful. Be more careful then. Quality standards don't change because you're getting old. Old. He's 32. And already getting old. His father lived to 47, which seemed like a long life for a brick maker. Khenti wonders if he'll make it that far. Wonders if his body will hold together another 15 years. That evening, Khenti returns home to find Nefert with news. Kamwasit has been formally accepted into the scribe school. Not as a full student, they can't afford that. But as a partial student, learning what he can, when he can, in the gaps between wealthier students' lessons. The teacher says he has real talent, Nefert reports, her face showing rare joy. He learns quickly. Remembers everything. He could actually become a scribe. Really become one. Khenti feels a surge of emotion so strong it surprises him. Hope? Fierce and painful and dangerous. Because hope can be crushed, and crushed hope hurts worse than no hope at all. But it's there regardless. His son might escape. Might have a different life. Might sit in the shade with papyrus and ink instead of standing in the sun with mud and molds. That's good, Khenti says, his voice rough. Very good. That night, he watches Kamwasit practice his writing. The boy's hand moves carefully across the pottery shard, forming the sacred symbols. The symbol for bread. The symbol for water. The symbol for sun. Ancient Egyptian writing was incredibly complex. The script combined phonetic symbols, ideograms, and determinatives in ways that took years to master. Full literacy required knowledge of hundreds of hieroglyphs, plus the cursive hieratic script used for everyday documents. It was a skill that marked you as educated, elevated, separate from the laboring masses. Father, Kamwasit asks, can you read this? Khenti looks at the symbols. They're beautiful, elegant, but meaningless to him. He might as well be looking at bird tracks and sand. No, he admits. I never learned. I could teach you. The teacher says anyone can learn, if they practice. Khenti almost laughs. When would he practice? After 12 hours of brick-making? With his damaged hands that can barely hold a beer cup, much less a reed pen? With his failing eyesight? Perhaps someday, he says instead. You focus on your own learning. That's what matters. The boy returns to his practice, and Khenti watches. This is his legacy, he realizes. Not the millions of bricks he's made. Not the buildings he's helped construct without ever seeing them completed. But this boy, learning to read and write, potentially escaping the cycle of manual labor that has defined their family for generations. If Kamwasit succeeds, then Khenti's suffering has purpose. All the pain, all the damaged hands and broken back and failing eyes, it all means something if it allows his son to have a different life. It's not much. But it's something. Outside, the Nile continues its slow recession. In a few weeks, the waters will retreat. The fields will emerge, covered in rich silt. Farmers will return to plant their crops. And the brick makers will return to the riverside clay pits, and production will increase again. The cycle continues. Always continues. The flood and the planting and the harvest. The making of bricks and the building of structures and the slow wearing down of human bodies in service of civilization. But within that cycle, small changes happen. A boy learns to read. A family's trajectory shifts slightly. One generation's suffering becomes the next generation's opportunity. Khenti lies down to sleep, his body aching as always, but his mind carrying something new. Not happiness, exactly. But a kind of peace. A sense that his life, boring and painful as it is, might not be meaningless after all. Tomorrow, more bricks. 300 bricks. The same motions, the same clay, the same sun. But tomorrow, his son will also practice his writing. We'll learn another hieroglyph. We'll take another small step toward a different future. And that makes tomorrow worth reaching for. The floodwaters recede slowly, as they always do. The Nile retreats to its banks, leaving behind the rich black silt that gives Egypt its life. The fields emerge, glistening and fertile, ready for planting. And with the recession of the waters, the brick makers return to their usual work sites near the river. The transition back to full production is sudden. One day they're making 1,500 bricks at the temporary site. The next, they're back to 2,000 at the riverside yards. The reprieve of the flood season is over, swallowed back into the normal rhythm of relentless production. Khenti feels the difference immediately. His body had begun to adapt to the slightly reduced workload, and now it must readapt to the full quota. The first day back at 2,000 bricks leaves him more exhausted than he's been in months. But there's also something different about the clay. The flood has replenished the deposits, bringing fresh sediment from upriver. The texture is slightly different, smoother, more workable. It's a small thing, but brick makers notice such details. Good clay makes the work marginally easier, and anything that makes the work easier is precious. The annual Nile flood did more than just irrigate fields. It also renewed the raw materials that made Egyptian civilization possible. The clay for bricks, the papyrus reeds for writing material, the silt for pottery, all were refreshed by the flood's deposits. In this way, Egypt's prosperity wasn't just agricultural but industrial, dependent on the river's reliable cycle. The work yard has changed during the flood season. Some workers didn't return. Old Jehudi is gone. He apparently died during the flood months, his body finally giving out. A few others left for various reasons, reassignment, injury, or simply disappearing, choosing to flee their labor obligations and take their chances elsewhere. Fleeing labor obligations was risky. Egypt had an administrative system that tracked workers, recorded their assignments, and pursued those who abandoned their posts. Some people managed to disappear into the anonymity of large cities or remote areas, but many were caught and faced severe penalties, increased labor obligations, loss of rations, sometimes physical punishment. New workers have joined to replace those who left. Khenti doesn't bother learning all their names anymore. People come and go. Some last weeks, some last years. There's no point in getting attached. One of the new arrivals catches his attention, though. A woman. This is unusual but not unprecedented. Women occasionally worked in brick making, particularly during labor shortages or when family circumstances required it. Her name is Takhit, and she's perhaps 25. Her husband died. Panab mentions this briefly when assigning her to a team, and she has children to feed. She's been assigned the lighter work of mixing straw into clay and preparing molds, but she still has a quota. Still has to produce. Women in ancient Egyptian labor occupied an interesting position. They had more legal rights than women in many other ancient societies. They could own property, conduct business, initiate divorce. But they were still generally paid less than men for the same work, and certain types of heavy labor were predominantly male. Brick-making was one of those predominantly male occupations, but not exclusively. Women worked in weaving, grinding grain, brewing beer, and various other industries. When necessity demanded it, they also worked in construction, agriculture, and even mining. Khenti watches taxation work during the morning. She's struggling, not with the skill, but with the physical demands. Her arms aren't as strong as a man's, and trampling clay for hours is exhausting even for fit young men. She's falling behind her quota, and Panab is already watching her critically. During the midday break, Khenti approaches her. She's sitting apart from the others, eating her bread alone. "First week is the hardest," he says. "Your body needs time to adapt." She looks up at him wearily. "I'm doing my best." "I know. But you're falling behind. Maybe 60 bricks short of where you should be at midday." Her face tightens with worry. "I'll work faster this afternoon." "That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, work smarter. When you're trampling the clay, use your whole body weight, not just your legs. Fall into each step. It's more efficient. And when mixing straw, don't stir it, fold it. Like kneading bread. Saves energy." She considers this, then nods. "Thank you. We all help each other here." "Have to. The quotas are designed to be almost impossible. Only way to meet them is if we work together." This was true of much Egyptian labor. The individual quotas were set high enough that meeting them required not just personal effort but collective cooperation. Teams that functioned well together could meet their targets. Teams that didn't often failed, and failure meant everyone suffered. The afternoon proceeds. Khenti notices taxation implementing his suggestions. She's still behind, but not as badly. She might make it. Or she might not. Time will tell. His own work continues in its familiar rhythm. Scoop, slap, press, smooth, lift. He's made these motions millions of times over the years. Literally millions. If you calculated 15 years of work, roughly 300 working days per year, 400 bricks per day, that's 1.8 million bricks. 1.8 million repetitions of the same basic motion. The number is staggering when he thinks about it. So he tries not to think about it. Around mid-afternoon, something unusual happens. A scribe arrives with an announcement. He reads from a papyrus scroll, his voice carrying across the workyard. By order of the Royal Construction Administration, a new incentive system is being implemented. Teams that exceed their quotas by 10% for a full month will receive bonus rations. An additional measure of grain and oil for each worker. This creates a stir among the brick makers. Bonus rations. Extra food beyond the standard allocation. For workers living at subsistence level, this is significant. Meaningful. But there's immediate skepticism too. Exceed quota by 10%? Nact mutters. That's 2,200 bricks per day. For 30 consecutive days. While maintaining quality standards. That's impossible, Senab finishes. Or nearly so. Khenti does the math. 10% above quota for him personally would be 440 bricks per day instead of 400. 40 extra bricks. That's perhaps an extra hour of work, maybe more given how exhausted he already is by the end of each day. Incentive systems in ancient Egyptian labor were relatively sophisticated. Administrators understood that pure coercion had limits. Workers pushed beyond their capacity would sicken, injure themselves, or flee. So carrots were mixed with sticks, bonus rations for exceptional performance, festivals and celebrations, occasional days off, and other incentives designed to maintain productivity. Whether these incentives actually worked is debatable. Some workers responded to them. Others remained at their baseline productivity regardless. But the existence of such systems shows that Egyptian administrators were thinking about labor management in relatively complex ways. Should we try for it? Ammonius asks the team. The bonus rations would help. We could save them, trade them. We'd have to sustain it for 30 days, Khenti points out. Not just achieve it once. 30 consecutive days of exceeding quota, while maintaining our current quality levels. It's a huge ask. But possible, Taotep says hopefully. If we all committed to it. The young man still has some optimism left. Khenti envies that. They discuss it during the evening, after work ends. The team gathers, exhausted but engaged, debating whether to attempt the bonus. We'd need to start earlier, Senab observes. Maybe arrive half an hour before the normal start time. Get the clay preparation done while we're fresh. And work through one of the afternoon breaks, Nact adds. The shorter one. That would give us the time needed for the extra 40 bricks each. What about quality? Khenti asks. More volume usually means more defects. If our defect rate goes up, we'll be penalized, and that would offset any bonus. They consider this. It's a real concern. Speed and quality exist in tension. Push for one, and the other suffers. We'd have to be more careful, not faster, Ammonius says. Which means the extra production has to come from extended hours, not increased pace. So we're talking about adding at least an hour to each workday, Khenti summarizes. For 30 days straight. On top of the 12 hours we already work. With no guarantee we'll maintain quality standards. Put that way, it sounds daunting. Maybe impossible. But the bonus rations. Taotep says quietly. My family could really use them. We're always short. Always hungry. An extra measure of grain could mean my sisters eat properly. And there it is. The real calculation. Not whether it's physically possible, but whether it's worth the cost. Whether pushing their already damaged bodies further is justified by the reward. Ancient Egyptian workers faced these calculations constantly. Push harder for potential rewards, or conserve energy for survival. Risk injury for temporary gain, or maintain sustainable pace. There were no good answers, only choices between difficult options. Let's try, Khenti hears himself saying. For 1 week. If we can sustain it for a week, we'll know whether 30 days is feasible. If we can't, we'll know that too. The others nod. It's decided. They'll attempt the bonus. Khenti walks home as darkness falls, already regretting the decision. His body is barely managing the current workload. Adding more seems like madness. But Taotep's words echo in his mind. My sisters eat properly. That's what drives people to push beyond reasonable limits. Not ambition or greed, but the desperate need to feed their families. At home, he tells Nefert about the bonus plan. She listens, her face troubled. You're already exhausted every night, she says. Already injured. Push harder, and something will break. Your back, your shoulder, something will give out. I know. But an extra measure of grain per month, that's significant. That's Kamwasit's school fees covered. That's oil for lamps so he can study in the evening. That's you working yourself to death faster, she finishes. She's not wrong. But they both know he's going to do it anyway. Because what choice is there? That night, Khenti lies awake longer than usual. His body needs rest, but his mind won't quiet. Tomorrow they begin the attempt at the bonus. Tomorrow he'll wake even earlier, work even longer, push even harder. For what? For an extra measure of grain. For the possibility that his son might have slightly better opportunities. For the slim hope that suffering now might mean less suffering later. It's not much. But it's all he has to work with. The boring daily life of an Egyptian brickmaker. Not just about making bricks anymore, but about calculating whether you can make enough bricks to change anything. Whether you can push your body just a little further before it breaks completely. And in the morning, he'll find out. The first day of the bonus attempt begins before dawn. Khenti wakes even earlier than usual, his body protesting before he's even fully conscious. Everything hurts. The prospect of not just a full day of work, but an extended day, feels overwhelming. But he rises anyway. Forces himself through the morning routine. Eats his bread. Drinks his beer. Wraps his hands. And walks to the workyard in darkness so complete he navigates more by memory than sight. He's not alone. The others from his team are there too, shadowy figures in the pre-dawn gloom. They've all made the same choice. To try. To push. To see if they can extract just a little more from bodies that have already given so much. They begin preparing the clay before the official start time. By the time the sun rises and Panem arrives, they're already ahead, the clay trampled and mixed, ready for molding. It gives them a precious head start. The morning proceeds at the usual pace. Scoop, slap, press, smooth, lift. But there's a new intensity to it, a focus born of purpose. They're not just making bricks. They're attempting something specific, measurable. Attempting to exceed. By midday, Khenti has made 220 bricks. He's ahead of his usual pace. The early start helped, and the team's collective focus is making a difference. They're all producing slightly faster than normal without sacrificing quality. The midday break comes. Usually, Khenti would rest for the full 30 minutes, eating and recovering in whatever shade he can find. Today, he rests for only 20 minutes. Then he's back at his station, back to making bricks while others are still eating. Those extra 10 minutes will add up. Over the course of the day, over the course of 30 days, those minutes become hours. Hours become bricks. Bricks become bonus rations. This is the arithmetic of survival. Breaking life down into increments so small they seem meaningless individually, but which accumulate into something significant. The afternoon is brutal. The sun blazes overhead with the intensity that only the Egyptian sun can manage. The temperature must be well over 40 degrees Celsius, hot enough that the clay begins drying almost as soon as it's molded, hot enough that Khenti's vision swims with heat shimmer. But he continues. They all continue. The rows of bricks behind them growing longer. 300. 350. 400. 420. By the time the normal workday ends, Khenti has made 435 bricks. 35 over his quota. The team as a whole has exceeded by roughly 10%. The first day is successful. But the cost is evident. Everyone is more exhausted than usual. Senab is limping badly. Nak's hands are bleeding through his wrappings. Taotep looks ready to collapse. And this is just day 1. 29 more days to go. They return home in the gathering darkness. Khenti's body moves automatically, his mind too tired to fully process the walk. He arrives home, eats without tasting, and collapses onto his sleeping mat. Nefret doesn't say anything. Just helps him drink water, checks his wounds, covers him with a blanket. Her silence is more eloquent than words. She's worried. He knows she's worried. But there's nothing to be done about it. Sleep comes quickly, heavy and dreamless. Exhaustion so complete it bypasses normal sleep processes and simply shuts the body down. The second day is harder. The accumulated fatigue from day 1 hasn't fully cleared. Khenti wakes feeling like he didn't sleep at all, his muscles stiff and sore, his joints swollen. But he goes. They all go. Because stopping after 1 day would mean the first day's suffering was for nothing. Day 2 proceeds like day 1. Early arrival. Extended work hours. Reduced breaks. And at the end, another successful day of exceeding quota. But the cracks are starting to show. Senab's knee is worse. He can barely put weight on it, but he continues working, redistributing his weight, compensating with his other leg, sacrificing long-term health for short-term production. Ancient Egyptian workers had remarkably sophisticated knowledge of practical medicine. They could set broken bones, treat cuts and infections, manage pain with various herbal remedies. But they had no concept of long-term physical therapy, of allowing injuries to fully heal before returning to work. You worked through injuries because stopping meant no rations. And no rations meant starvation. So you wrapped your wounds, gritted through the pain, and hoped your body could hold together long enough to finish whatever task you were attempting. Day 3. Day 4. The team maintains their elevated production. But the human cost is mounting. Takhit, the woman who joined recently, is struggling. She's consistently short of even her regular quota, let alone the bonus target. Panab is watching her, his expression growing more disapproving each day. On day 5, he calls her aside after the morning inspection. "You're not meeting standards," he tells her bluntly. "Your production is low, and your quality is inconsistent. I'm reassigning you to straw preparation. Lower quota, lower rations." Khenti sees the devastation on her face. Lower rations mean less food for her children. She's tried, pushed herself as hard as she could, but her body simply couldn't sustain the demands of brick molding. This was the harsh reality of quota-based labor. Not everyone could meet the standards. Physical capacity varied. Some people were stronger, faster, more enduring. Others, through no fault of their own, simply couldn't keep pace. And the system had no room for compassion. You performed or you were reassigned to lesser work with lesser rewards. Your personal circumstances, children to feed, elderly parents to support, didn't matter. Only production mattered. Takhit is led away to the straw preparation area. Khenti watches her go and feels a mix of pity and guilt. Pity for her situation. Guilt that his own family's relative security comes partly from his ability to meet quotas that others cannot. The week continues. Day 6. Day 7. At the end of the 7th day, the team gathers to assess. 7 consecutive days of exceeding quota by 10%. It's an achievement. But it's also clear that sustaining this for 30 days might not be possible. Senab can't continue, Ammonius says quietly. His knee, it's getting worse, not better. He needs rest. Senab shakes his head stubbornly. I can manage. Just needs to. No, Khenti interrupts. Ammonius is right. You need to drop back to regular production. Let the knee heal. If you permanently damage it trying for the bonus, you'll lose more than you gain. They debate briefly, but eventually Senab concedes. He'll return to normal production levels. Which means the team is short 1 person for the bonus attempt. The remaining 4 would need to make up the difference. That's approximately 50 extra bricks each, not 40. The calculation shifts, and not in their favor. I can do 50, Taotep says, though his voice wavers slightly. I'll start even earlier. Work through both afternoon breaks. You'll burn out, Nat warns. Push too hard and you'll collapse like that worker last month. Remember? He tried to work through heat sickness and ended up dead. Heat stroke was a constant danger in Egyptian work sites, particularly during the hottest months. Workers who pushed beyond their limits, who ignored the warning signs of overheating, sometimes simply collapsed and died. Their bodies, already stressed by labor and dehydration, reached a breaking point and failed. The debate continues into the evening. Should they continue? Should they abandon the attempt? Should some of them continue while others drop back? Finally, Khenti makes a decision. I'm continuing. Anyone who wants to join me is welcome. Anyone who needs to stop, stop. No judgment. We each know our own limits. It's more choice than Egyptian workers usually had. Most labor was dictated by overseers, by quotas, by systems that left no room for individual decision-making. But here, in this small space, Khenti is offering autonomy. The freedom to choose their level of suffering. Taotep and Nak decide to continue. Ammonius decides to drop back to normal production, his body already showing signs of breaking down from the extended effort. So they're 3 now. 3 workers attempting to maintain the elevated production. The odds have gotten worse. The difficulty has increased. But they're committed. Having come this far, having suffered through 7 days, the thought of stopping now feels like waste. Like all that pain was for nothing. Day 8 begins. Then day 9. Then day 10. The 3 of them work in a kind of synchronized suffering. They arrive early together. They work through breaks together. They push through exhaustion together. It creates a bond, forged in shared difficulty. The ancient Egyptian concept of brotherhood among workers was real and significant. Workers often referred to each other as brother, regardless of actual family relationships. They understood that survival depended on collective effort, on mutual support, on the bonds formed through shared hardship. By day 15, the halfway point, they've maintained the pace. 15 consecutive days of 10% overproduction. The bonus is starting to seem possible. Not easy, but possible. But the cost is written on their bodies. Khenti has lost weight despite eating his full rations. His body is consuming itself, burning muscle for energy, unable to fully recover between the extended work days. His hands are a mess of scars and bleeding cracks. His back pain has become so constant he's almost learned to ignore it. Taotep, despite his youth, looks haggard. The optimism that characterized his first weeks has been beaten out of him by the relentless grind. He's learned what all brick makers eventually learn, that hope is dangerous, that it's safer to simply endure without expecting better. And Nacht, who used to joke to make the work bearable, has stopped joking. Has stopped talking much at all. He just works in grim silence, his face set in an expression of pure determination. They're 15 days in. 15 days to go. Halfway to the bonus. Halfway to proof that human will can overcome physical limits. Or halfway to complete breakdown. The line between the two is narrow and getting narrower. That evening, Khenti comes home to find Ramesses waiting excitedly. "Father," the teacher says, "I'm ready to begin learning Hierarchical script. The cursive writing. That's what real scribes use every day. I'm really learning." Khenti looks at his son's eager face. This is why he's doing it. Why he's pushing through the pain and exhaustion. So this boy can have opportunities. Can become something other than a brick maker. "That's good," Khenti says, his voice rough with fatigue. "Very good. Keep working hard." "I will." "And Father? Thank you. For everything you do. I know you work hard so I can learn." The boy's words hit harder than Khenti expected. His eyes sting with unexpected emotion. His son understands. Understands the sacrifice. Understands what's being given up for his education. "Just make it worth it," Khenti says quietly. "Become a scribe. Have a better life. That's all I ask." Ramesses nods solemnly. "I promise I'll try." That night, despite his exhaustion, Khenti lies awake for a while. Thinking about the 15 days completed and the 15 days remaining. Thinking about his son's promise. Thinking about the endless production of bricks and whether any of it really matters. The boring daily life of an Egyptian brick maker. But not quite so boring anymore. Now it's a test. A challenge. A question of whether flesh and will can endure beyond what seems possible. 15 more days will give the answer. And so Khenti continues his struggle, pushing beyond limits, suffering for hope. May these hours have brought you peace, knowledge, and restful sleep. Good night.